I'm excited to introduce our next panel, which is going to talk about scaling the NRP ecosystem from regional to national to international. So the way that we ordered the sessions for today, we just heard from the campuses talking about their experiences, their insights, their perspectives on what's needed to help support them at the campus level. And then this next panel here will talk about what's needed to scale at a regional level, a national level, and even a global level. I'd like to first introduce our panelists. We have Lars Fischer from Nordnet. He's the Strategy and Policy Officer there. We have Marla Meehl, who is the section head of the Network Engineering and Telecommunications section at UCAR. We have Inder Monga, Executive Director for ESnet and the Division Director for Scientific Networking at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Howard Pfeffer, who is the President and CEO of Internet 2. Kate Mace, who's the Strategic Programs Manager at ESnet. And Jent Schopf, Director of International Networks at Indiana University. So each of our panelists have slides. They like to share their perspective of their work that's happening in their corner of the region, the nation, or the globe in scaling the research platform. And then we plan to have some time after for panel discussion and audience discussion.
So I'm going to spend a little bit of time introducing the region I represent and then try to take you to some of the challenges we face in trying to join the PRP or NRP or GRP or whatever we want to call it community. I usually say that I represent the frozen north, but I probably wouldn't be fair to the people of beautiful Montana. So I will just say that I represent the northern part of Europe. It's a region made up of 4 fiercely independent countries that do have a habit of working together. Like Montana, most of the region is very sparsely populated, but has really, really good infrastructure. So there's fiber everywhere, there's 100 gig networks everywhere, there's 5G, 4G networks deployed everywhere, there's 5G is coming in pretty soon. And each country has their own R&E network that serves their constituency, serves their campuses. And they're very advanced networks, 200 gig to all the campuses, things like that. And there's a very high level of services from some of these campuses. Current drivers are things like within big advances in lecture capturing, video on-campus studios, movie making, things like that, within lecture sharing and those kinds of things. Big drivers for storage, centralized services for video streaming and things like that. But unlike North America, the science DMC isn't really a concept that has taken track there. We're not seeing a lot of that type of infrastructure. We're seeing very traditional lands on the campuses, and we're seeing traditionally NRENs, the R&E networks, just go to the campus border and not very much engage with the campus IT departments, and certainly not being engaged with the scientists. So if we look at our challenges for doing PRP style work, that is probably our main challenge. That's probably where we need to work. There has been some work going into establishing campus border management. Some of the networks, in particular Sweden, Norway and Finland, are doing a lot of that. They manage the borders, and we have seen a drive from some of the campuses in asking for campus network management or even campus networks as a service. So some of the R&E networks are going to offer that. We're seeing some experiments with that, and I think that will be an opportunity to bring in things like Science DMC. So we have decided in Nordnet, on behalf of the region, to start an initiative to try to get some of the PRP infrastructure in, to try to trial some of these things with our R&E networks in the region, and to try to identify some use cases that we can bring this technology and this approach to our region and try to see what is it takes for us to join this community. So we're doing infrastructure deployment to demonstrate and to be able to show that we have things that can be done and show what can be done, to do some of the things that Eli talked about this morning. We're doing workshops. John Hess talked about it yesterday, that we were gracious support of ESnet and particularly CNIC and UCSD, have run a workshop in Copenhagen recently where we brought a number of practitioners from our area and also from the Netherlands, where we work a lot with SurfNet. We brought them in and gave them training in how to set up DTNs, how to operate DTNs, what the PRP approach is, and so on. And so we're hoping to bring at least the engineering to the level where people can support these kind of technologies. We're trying to do community building. The next step is really to do some outreach to the campus side and try to get some of these ideas understood. And then also to do some outreach to our Nordic collaborators on the policy and funding side, and to do some outreach to the wider European community, work with the European Union, work with Xiang and other networks like that to see what we can do with that. So we've been doing a lot with local training, and I think we're getting a good understanding on how to do those things. We have built John showed yesterday the little EL20 FioNet boxes. We built a rack that is in a flight case with 2 FioNet boxes and 25 of these FioNet boxes, and we are having that as a portable tool we can bring to a site and run a complete course on perf sonar or on how to set up DTN boxes and how to set up Fionas. We're finding that very useful. We are lending that out to SurfNet in next month, so they will run some training in their site. Yeah, there they are. Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, we have a rack with 2, traditional 10 gig Fiona boxes and then 25 of these, so we can run a course where each participant in the course get their own box and get to sit and configure, get to sit and try it out, and where there is a common repository and where there are the 10 gig Fiona boxes that they can run against and all of that, so you can really get down and do it hands-on and not just read slides and learn the theory, but actually learn to do it and walk away from there understanding how to do this stuff. So that's one thing we're doing. We're deploying at our open exchanges 100 gig boxes so that we have something where we can experiment and show to the community that we can really get line rate towards the US or towards Australia or wherever else we want to do. We're looking at some of the tools we have developed locally that have been successful and trying to model on what is it those tools are and what made them successful. There's a tool developed originally in Norway called FileSender that has gotten a lot of traction in Europe and is widely deployed by ESnet in Australia, for example. FileSender is a super simple tool. It's just a website where you log in, upload a file, get a URL back for that file, email it to your collaborator, and they can download the file from there. And then it gets deleted after a while, right? So it's a way to send 20 gig attachment, 100 gig attachments to mail. Turns out that even though it's so simple, it just filled the hole. There were lots and lots of people out there who needed a way to send to a few of their collaborators a big file with email and couldn't do it, so this one does that. But of course, if the file is really big, even though we've done a lot of JavaScript engineering trying to make that download through a browser work, I mean, it doesn't work for really large data. So there's an effort now to use some of the DTN technology as a backend to build a distributed file sender approach where you can upload at your local file sender and then tell your collaborator to download from their local site and do that automatically. So it provides a front end for using the DTN infrastructure, in part because we don't have the science DMC technologies that in many sites that are prevalent in the US, right? So and also building on things that people already know in Scandinavia. So since there's a lot of traction for that, there's an open source consortium for FileSender. There's a lot of support from NordUnet, Uninet in Norway, from ESnet in Australia in particular. So we're expecting to see pretty good traction with that, and to get some uptake pretty quickly once we get some betas out for that. So I have fairly high expectations for that. Another thing we're doing is we're trying to identify. I want to find evangelists in my area. I want to find researchers that have seen the benefit of using the PRP approach and using data transfer nodes, and I want to get things deployed with them. So I'm looking at, transfer logs, I'm talking to science communities, and I don't want to talk to the European Spallation Source or to CERN because we can support them in other ways, but I want to find, the longer tail scientists who are looking for ways to transfer real large data sets. And clearly I've identified a couple of researchers who are working closely with partners at universities in California or in other areas that already has PRP in the US, right? So we can help them do their research and demonstrate with that and hope they will evangelize the approach. So that's one thing we're doing. Another thing we're doing is we're looking for researchers who really don't have these enormous demands, because often that is not the challenge people have. Lots of researchers actually don't have that huge transfers. It just turns out because they're using, again, as Eli said this morning, they're using data repositories with old legacy portals that give them really, really bad performance. Right? My poster child at the moment is a volcanic researcher in Iceland who, in order to do his volcanic research, needs regular data downloads from the European Space Agency, and the only way he can get that data from low orbits and satellites is to log into a portal they have and use, his browser to download data. And he's getting the kind of performance that if I had that at home, my children will come and say to me, "Dad, you've got to fix this. We can't play Fortnite," right? So, and there are actually a shocking number of researchers out there who have seen those kind of challenges. And so if we can just get one of these deployed with him, right? It only does 1 gig. But if you can get sustained 1 gig, and there is infrastructure at portals like European Space Agency have for observation data, we go a long way, right? And it doesn't have to cost a lot at his university. He can put it on his desk, but it will still do it for him, right? So we're trying to get those kind of pilots in place and demonstrate that is a way to advance these methodologies, right? So those are very important things for us. Longer term, we're working with the European Commission, and we're working with organizations like Xiang and trying to embed some of these ideas in some of these programs. The European Commission has huge programs where they fund enormous infrastructures, and they have these very centralized approaches that wants to offer centralized service catalogs and centralized data repositories and centralized portals, and getting them to do things in a agile, flexible way isn't really the brothel way, but we're trying to get there, and I do think we're getting some traction with that. I would like to get them to fund a couple of programs with some of their large research support organizations like the genomics repositories they have in Britain and other of these organizations. Because again, I think if we can get a few poster childs with that will advance these things in Europe. So, in summary, our challenges are really about the distance to the scientists and the lack of a tradition for doing science engagement from the R&E networks in Scandinavia and in Europe. There is some communities springing up to do more of this. Seeing some of the things that were talked about this morning, some of the things that were presented here in the previous panel was really inspiring, and I hope we can replicate some of that. We do have task forces in the Xiang community to do a science engagement, and I think if we get some of these things going and deploy some of these pilots, the thing should sell itself, right? But the real challenge for us is getting to the scientists and getting into the campuses and having the campuses collaborate with us on these things. But at least we've started, and I hope to have much more to tell you next year.
Thank you. Next, Inder, we're going to turn to you. Pass down, yeah. Thank you.
Academy would like to. Hi. The topic was about scaling, and I wanted to put up a chart. I made a build chart. Just build it all the way. I think that's the best way. Thank you. One more click. Yeah, that's it. So this is an example, and I think it's not meant to scare anyone, and I think you're very familiar with the LHC example, so I chose to choose a different example. So this is a new detector being built in Slack, and I'm happy to see one esteemed colleague that is joining Slack recently and is going to be working on the computational piece of things. But the detector produces 1 terabyte a second, which is 8 terabits per second. And if you look at the graph at the bottom left, that is the data rate that they predict, it's starting at, less than 10 gig, going to 100 gig, and then soon climbing up to around 8 terabits per second. Now that is without any data reduction, but scientists are hopeful that they can throw some of the data away. That doesn't matter. And so they're expecting a 10x data reduction, but it's still a terabits per second when you get to it. So when we talk about scaling and scaling PRP and scaling DTNs, and we are looking at some coming up experiments, and this is not too far out. So if you think of 2024, it is not that far out when it comes to infrastructure change. So that's the kind of problems we look at, and what do we need to do now? So I wanted to speak to that rather than Eli talked about what do we need to do now to get onto this path to solve this problem. But these are the kind of problems that we see happening. Now, these problems are not just for the network in terms of capacity, but how do you use that capacity? What kind of disks, I/O? So it is a complete systems problem. It's not just a network problem, but that's what we need. So from a vision perspective as ESnet, we just see this as only one of the many experiments that are evolving. So you have got LCLS, you have got Advanced Photon Source, we have Joint Genome Institute, we have the Large Hadron Collider in its high luminosity. So we see a whole bunch of instruments going on the same path as this one representative example. Now, there are changes happening, I think, in terms of data management, data portals, new compute platforms. You hear about exascale, you hear about real-time analysis, people changing from batch queues to real-time queues. You hear about cloud computing, cloud bursting. So all of these, actually, the network plays a central role in making all of this happen. And I think that's what I want everyone to realize, is that it plays a central role, but onboarding onto the network. So if there is, remember that fort from the medieval century, great fort, everything, but there is a moat. So getting to and in and out of the fort was always an issue. In this case, we don't want a moat. We want an easy on-ramp. So the one example quad chart I wanted to give you was on the petascale DTN that Eli presented. I'm going to talk a little bit about it and leave the rest of it for you guys to read and read and observe. This was kind of our starting PRP. We had DTNs at all the sites, but they were either not well configured or they were not enough to sustain the goal, which was 1 petabyte a week. Now, that is still a very modest goal. I think we are pushing for more, and I think we can do more. But at least that modest goal helped everyone get on the same page, where they didn't say, impossible, go away, are you guys kidding? So when it was something that was also based on a science thing, so they needed a petabyte a week transfer. So when you say, hey, that scientist wants it, you had less resistance from the cyber infrastructure people that, hey, we don't do technology for technology's sake. So that is really important, is to find that science use case and integrate it when you're talking about scaling. And then we did DOE sites, but we also put NCSA in there that also helped the ecosystem, where there was a little bit of a friendly competition going on, which allowed everyone to invest time, energy, and money in building the right infrastructure. And the outcome you see is really good. But it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes, not the kind of effort where you see, it's not an edict. It is about everyone getting onto the same vision and the same page. And I'm 100% sure that scaling PRP to NRP will happen. And I think it is great that all of you are here and believing in the vision and coming onto the same page.
Howard.
Thank you. So, based on the last panel discussion, clearly scaling the PRP to the NRP is a lot of elements and dimensions outside of networking, but there's still a bunch of networking stuff that probably needs to happen as well. So yesterday there was a panel discussion about a test bed, a pilot test bed, or a test bed pilot. Here's an example of some of the things on this test bed we're looking at piloting. The idea here is that we would potentially carve off some capacity, maybe 100 gigs worth. We would put in some switching routing infrastructure that's more programmable, more suited for automation and better telemetry. And we've been starting discussions with OneNet and Kinver about putting together some end-to-end use cases for science flows. Assumption on scalability is that all these we're very successful as a community on getting all these DTNs tuned and working and all the problems worked out. So we have a lot of successful science flows going on, and in those cases, there's network things we're going to want to understand and trial. For instance, you may be looking at a path, a flow that would go from Seattle to New York. So go Seattle, Chicago in this picture on that blue line, and then from Chicago on that north blue line to New York. Well, that north part may be utilized, so you may want to actually take the better path that has more capacity and can meet whatever latency requirements you have, and make that traffic engineering decision. How do we tie that to the application space? How do we make that, automagical and seamless? And there's lots of debugging scenarios if you want to move flows independent of the underlying routing protocols, to be able to move them around a box to see maybe that box is having a problem, those kind of capabilities. In addition, we heard a lot in the last couple of, since yesterday and today, about these Fona boxes, these PRP nodes are running Kubernetes, they're running applications. There's going to probably be new and interesting communication patterns between those applications and those boxes, maybe external resources. So should there be the ability to run flows going not DTN to DTN, but maybe a Fiona box running a DTN off somewhere else, and should that go through some additional security functions, inspection, what kind of monitoring capabilities? We're working with a bunch of usual suspects and vendors to mock some stuff up in labs, and the hope is that sometime maybe later this year we could deploy a pilot test bed like this and start to run some interesting experiments. And we're really, I said we're looking for collaborators, and certainly people have real science flows, so we're not just trying to mock up traffic, but can actually look at different scenarios with real end-to-end use cases. The other example is, as was said yesterday, we've been working with OSG on basically using the PRP infrastructure and framework of Kubernetes to, we added several boxes and some more capacity, and are using that infrastructure to deploy additional OSG caches. One of the more interesting use cases is, since once you've containerized your applications, they can run both on PRP nodes, but they could also run in commercial cloud. Co-locating some of these caches close to where we have, I think, an aggregate internet too, is something like 800 gigs worth of aggregate capacity amongst the major 3 cloud providers. So if we co-located these caches close there, just like you co-locate caches close to national resources or any kind of community resource, are there interesting data movement models and performance models, because it's just more compute resources to look at. So we're adding that, as well as the rich telemetry that OSG provides in those kind of use cases. So those are sort of 2 examples that we're looking at from the sort of the network side and the data movement side on scaling up, with the assumption that this is all going to be significantly successful, and we'll have lots and lots of both very large flows, as well as probably some new patterns that we haven't anticipated yet.
All right, so we started with international. We've heard from 2 national perspectives. We're moving into a regional perspective, but with Marla.
Yeah, and I just thought this was a timely quote. This was actually on a review that we just got on an NSF-CC star proposal, and I think it indicates we have a long way to go, right? This presumably is from a researcher. From a user standpoint, users have only their own trial and error way of locating the fastest service. It seems when the network is slow, we simply let the download continue and mind other things. So we are not reaching our audience, and I sit in a unique position maybe to some of you. I think we all wear a lot of hats. I know many of you do. I actually work at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. So I get to see networking really from the campus level. We take care of the local area networking for NCAR, but also we manage the Front Range Gigapop, which is the regional network for Colorado and Wyoming, and we work with the Western Regional Network, which is a multi-region network as well, and we utilize Internet 2 and ESnet. So I put this diagram together some number of years ago to try and explain the complexity and the collaboration that goes on in networking, all the way from the campus network, as I mentioned. We work with the Boulder Research Administration Network, which is a metro network. Then we go up into the larger region network of FRGP and WRN, which is multi-region. Then you go up to the national scale, the Internet 2s, the ESnets, the NordNets, and then, the intra-international networks that go on, the transatlantic and transpacific cabling that keeps all of this going. And so I put this together, and we really play at all of those levels. And as regionals, we're there to kind of tie those pieces together. The mission, and I wanted to use a case study of NOAA and NCAR. We support NOAA, which is based in Boulder. And both NOAA and NCAR are big producers of data, and we're big users of data. We have researchers, but we also produce a lot of data for researchers, both climate and weather data. And so, the mission, and this is broadly stated, and NOAA could complain with this, is to understand the behavior of the atmospheric and related Earth and geoscience systems, to support, enhance, extend the capability of the university community and broader scientific community nationally and internationally. This is our mission scientifically. It overlays this diagram very closely. To foster the transfer of knowledge and technology for the betterment of life on Earth. So really, how do we communicate that to society and engage them in solutions that may help us going on? So we have very strong campus, metro, regional, and national connections and collaborations, and it's in part due to necessity. We're sitting in Montana. The West is what we call geographically challenged. We have big spaces, difficult terrain, and relatively low population. So it's expensive to do networking, it's difficult to do networking, and so collaborations helps us reach across those geographic boundaries. So NCAR and NOAA, really utilize all of this infrastructure to do their science, and it's important that all be working in order to do that. So the challenges, I think, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I think the challenges are the same as everyone else is facing. Our future is faster, bigger computers, big data, really big data, as Inder alluded to. We're looking at cloud computing and storage. I think everybody's doing that. We just started a brand new group at NCAR focusing on data analytics, informatics, and machine learning. We're doing a lot of server-side analysis, trying not to move the data, trying to keep the data local to where we're storing it. We're doing more and more interdisciplinary collaboration, which is making things a bit more complex, right? It's not just climate scientists, climate science anymore, or weather to weather. We've got biologists, we've got geologists, we've got human impacts researchers that we're working with that aren't always even as comfortable with networking as climate and weather scientists are. We're running increasingly more complex, higher resolution models. I actually just shared with Inder the DOE did a fabulous video on their new exascale model that really does a great job of explaining what weather and climate models do. We're running what's called multi-model data sets, ensembles. The new climate model intercomparison CMIP is coming out. Every model across the country and across the world runs the same model, multiple examples, multiple experiments, and that data all has to be stored and be accessible to researchers. And then all of us are looking at what's called climate and weather services. How do we get that information out to the public? And how do we make it accessible? How do we make it usable for decision makers, for agriculture, for health, for disaster recovery, those kind of things. So we also have to provide that data to a broader audience. So, end-to-end performance is an ongoing problem. We deal with perf sonar, meshes, proactive information and detection. I noted NetSage on here because this is something we're looking at is could we help inform scientists about what network problems they're having. We're dealing with the same strategies everybody is about how to store and serve big data. As I said, CMIP analysis platform is something NCAR is experimenting with, keeping the data close to where we're storing it, but making analysis easier locally. Distributed data storage, CMIP has to be stored, as I said, nationally and internationally. How do we data mine and compress data so that not as much data has to be stored or moved? And we've been running DTNs for quite some time. We have a very large DTN system that provides data flows using Globus to our users. So, and data analytics, how do we actually cull that information, that big data down to make it really able to be analyzed by researchers, but also how to make it usable to the public. So that's where we sort of sit in the hierarchy and what we're working on, both as as researchers, but also how do we serve that as a region?
Thank you, Marla. If you pass the microphone down, next we're going to hear from Kate Mace at ESnet about research engagement.
Thanks, Jen. So I've been tasked with a topic on this panel that we've all been talking about quite a bit over the last few days, and actually over the last several years. So if you didn't come to this meeting being aware of what research or science engagement is, you probably have a better idea now after this, especially the great panels we had today. So what I've done here is this is actually part of a panel that happened a year ago. This is Tom Cheatham. I got his permission to use this. If you weren't here last year, this is also in the report. So I actually pulled this from the report from the first NRP research platform. So you also heard a lot about the ACI REF program and then the follow-on, the campus research computing infrastructure that's been funded. And so they were asked a question, actually two questions. If the Campus Research Computing Infrastructures Consortium could deliver one thing to you, a must-have, what would it be? So these are two, this is the Wordle that you have over on the left. If you're familiar with Wordles, the more frequently the word is used, the larger it appears in the actual graphic. So you'll see training practices, resources, HPC development, career, access, things like that. And then following that is, what is the biggest barrier preventing or limiting your must-have? Well, pretty clear there, and we also already know this, but it's interesting to see it here graphically represented. Time, lack of resources, limited staff, HPC training expertise, etc. So why do I put this up, reminding us that we were talking about this a year ago? Some people have been doing engagement in pockets actually for quite some time, but we're now realizing as a community that this is a great need, as we've all just been discussing. So I included on my next slide a graphic from the National Science Board report, the Science and Engineering Indicators, on the 2018 report. It comes out every 2 years. So this is an estimated number of researchers from selected regions of the country from the year 2000 to 2015. So this is a trend that we're all pretty well aware of, right? But it's interesting that the rising emphasis on developing science and engineering expertise is a global trend, right? We all see this as important. And it's also important to note this is indicating certain regions or countries in the world, but this is actually happening not only in the developed economies, but all around the world. However, much of that work is concentrated in the developed nations, where a significant portion of the research and development is happening and takes place. So for my next slide, to lead into that, so that graphic you see in the middle is taken from the same report, and it's estimated R&D expenditures worldwide from 2000 to 2015. So you can see clearly it's an upward trend. Now there is a large portion of that is actually from the commercial sector. But the amount that academia and government put into this as well is not insignificant. But the reason that I included this and includes the commercial sector and R&E is, so we're talking about the need for sustainable, dedicated engagement professionals, right? This panel is talking about scalability and how do we do that. So we have significant community momentum. We've been talking about this. We have several things in place to help train these people and to educate not only the workforce that will be coming and doing this, but also the people who need to utilize these skills, right? And we need to hand things over to the next generation. This is probably one of those jobs we talked about several years ago that we didn't know we needed, and 20 years ago, we don't know what jobs are going to be needed then as well. But so we're already expanding the training that we're doing as a community. And we've already talked about that this actually is a very unique skill set, right? We've talked sometimes about these people sometimes can be unicorns, especially if they're focused on particular aspects. And also, I don't know how many of you remember back when you had spare cycles in your day. Probably, I would say none of you. But this is actually a full-time job, and we've all talked about the challenge of having people do this, out of their back pocket in addition to everything that they're already doing. So the need to have this be a full-time job is very clear. And it's not just in a particular university, it's a global need, not just even in the in the nation. So why am I talking about this? So I've been thinking about how to propose this, and I think we've been talking about this for a long time. The need is very clear. I challenge us as a community to think about this differently moving forward. We have to do something different if we really want to scale this, right? And what I would propose is that we really start looking at the engagement professionals, whatever we want to call them, as a critical part of the instrument. The instrument being the network for many of us that actually operate these networks. It could be an HPC center or a cluster, whether you're focusing on GPUs or CPUs. Or it could be an observatory or a linear accelerator, whatever the case may be. But that this is part of the actual, it's a critical part of the instrument as a whole. And that we need to start looking at it as a fundamental requirement, just like the electrical, just like the network, plumbing for a building. If you think back 10, 15 years ago or more, if you've been part of an IT organization at a campus or at a laboratory, think about how far down the blueprints in a building they would think about, oh, we need to put network in there. Oh, we need to put network closets in there. We need to pull conduit. We've evolved from that from 10 to 15 years ago, right? But then thinking about this, we really need to have this, these engagement professionals focused on this moving forward so that it's not in hindsight. And we're talking about how do we fund this. But if we put this in as part of the full-time engagement staff and the ongoing facility and instrument costs, to me, that's the only way that we're going to actually scale this. And that also, so in the future, this also gives us a more complete view of supporting research and science, not only us who are actually operating these instruments, but also at a higher level, so they understand that this is really part of the critical infrastructure. Putting this in as future solicitations, we were presented yesterday with opportunities for future funding opportunities and encouraging people for new and innovative approaches to things, right? And this also allows us to leverage the investments from other agencies and industry. How do I say that is I think that it's important that we do have professionals focused on particular instruments so that they can stay up to date with these R&D expenditures that are happening in the commercial sector, but also in R&D, so that they can actually keep up and be in touch with the researchers and understand what they need to gather the requirements and then feed that back as well. So let's see, specific impacts. Well, basically this demonstrates the demand for the profession. I think that if we build this into our infrastructure costs and operating costs in an ongoing dynamic way, then it will naturally create this profession and will be supported also by people in the commercial sector who want to have people understand what they're doing in these research and development investments. And in the long run, faster adoption of best practices.
Thank you. Jen, would you like to talk about performance engineering and outreach?
Right. So I unrolled that chart so we can, in part because I was working on this on the plane and didn't have my reading glasses. Those fonts are tiny. So I wanted to talk about science engagement and how we're scaling that. Both formative this, we'd had some international work and we'd had some really great domestic work. Go ahead. And NSF recognized the need for this to actually be part of the instrument. So engagement as part of the instrument, as a fundamental piece of the infrastructure. And as part of the CC STAR program this year, there was a call for an operations center to help support engagement. IU and ESnet put in a joint proposal that's just recently been funded. The challenge we're addressing is looking at this end-to-end performance. We've heard everyone in this room has heard over the last day and a half how challenging this is. There's so many pieces. Soft failures are almost impossible to find. There's many different points of coordination needed. And so we put together an operations center, the Engagement and Performance Operations Center, that has 5 main focus areas. We're looking at how do we help people reactively when they have problems. How do we work with them proactively through application deep dives? How do we have a network monitoring system spread quite widely so that we can identify some of these failures before the application end users do? Can we support services in a box, managed services for campuses that can't support them themselves to offer some of these professional assistances? And of course, training. I'm going to talk about the 2 first ones primarily in this. I've got 7 whole minutes. The roadside assistance is, we think of it that way because this is, you're driving along the road and something happens. Who do you call? You call AAA. My file transfer worked fine last week. I tried to set it up last night and it just failed. I have no idea why. Who would you get in touch with? You don't know. We didn't have a AAA until we had EPOC. So we're taking together the work that ESnet has already been doing in the engagement team, the work that my team in the international space has been doing both reactively and proactively, and the IRNC NOC had been funded, the performance engagement team, to reactively address this and bringing those three groups together and giving people a single point of contact so that we can start working that. The second aspect of engagement is the deep dives. These are based on the ESnet case studies where we sit down and spend half a day to 2 days with an actual scientist and walk through their scientific workflow to do longer term planning. So you can think of this as the regular maintenance you do on your car so that you don't have the roadside assistance problem. You know that your tires are getting low before they are. We'll sit down and try to look at how we can help you ahead of time. And in addition, teach other folks how to do that. So Jason Zurawski has been doing this for years, very successfully in the DOE science community. We're trying to expand that. We're going to do some training in how to do this with a live victim/guinea pig at the quilt meeting on the Monday of the quilt meeting. So please consider coming early to see how we walk through this using a standard proven template that the ESnet folks have been building, which is linked to, gosh, I'm all the way on deep dives. Go two more. Okay. Please go to the next one then. So we're looking at scaling, right? This panel was really trying to address scaling. The first way is to have a central point of contact, we think. If you've got these problems, knowing who to go to is really hard because you're dealing with so many different domains. You're dealing with so many different pieces of setup. We've got an operations center approach. So building off of the GlobalNOC, we've got a ticketing system, we've got service center framework, we've got a dedicated team. This isn't just volunteers. We need the army of the willing, but you also need funded professionals to at least start this off and coordinate your effort to tie together the different communities. The flip side of this, of course, in terms of doing performance engagement is measurements. We need to have good measurements across the different systems. We're going to talk about that a little bit more this afternoon and how to take some of these community standard tools, the perf sonar tools, the grid FTP tests that are part of that, and coordinate and deploy it more broadly. But I just wanted to leave you with this slide. So we've got this new funded center. It's really new, like less than 6 weeks old. We're happy to come and talk to you about it. If you've got these problems, we have the roadside assistance already set up because we're building off of these proven pieces. So this is one way, as Kate said, that engagement has become part of the instrument. Thank you.
So we've asked our panelists to walk through their perspectives in an accelerated way, so we have time for some questions and conversation with all of you. I've got a couple of questions, but I'd like to open up first to you, listening to the different perspectives, if you'd like to ask our panelists anything first.
So thank you for your different perspectives. A question that I have directly for EPOC, but also for others broadly. Who is it that you're really targeting as a user? Coming from a campus perspective, I think that the relationships that campuses have with researchers is really important. And I think it's relatively rare that a researcher is going to go to your roadside assistance. And so how do you see the engagement of a national network or regional network or an environment like this with the campuses?
That's a really good question. So one of the things I didn't talk about was the fact that EPOC is actually a consortium of partnerships. We had letters of collaboration from 6 regional networks, 6 application and science groups, and 6 different infrastructure groups. So our audience is all of the above. So we'll be working with the regionals and the local networks. We'll be going to science communities and working with them directly. We've already done some of this, especially in geoscience, in part because that's a growing community that's using the networks that we've been supporting a lot, and trying to offer this support. It's really challenging when most of the scientists don't even know who to contact for network problems on their own campus at this point. And when a campus gets a problem like that, they don't know who to go to next often either. So part of this is trying to build some of these webs of interactions and giving people one point. Go ahead.
So it's a super relevant question, right? Because I don't want to inject myself between a campus and their researchers. in part because there's an intimate relation there. There's going to be things I don't understand that I can't support, but also it doesn't scale. But I've also learned from supporting very large experiments, such as the LHC, that in that community, it helps for me to engage directly with the local LHC Tier 1 center, whatever it is. And what has, I think one thing we've taken away from the LHC experience is that that is not a conversation between large-scale networks and scientists. It's a conversation between the LHC, IT people, the scientists, the experiments, and all the different sites. And we regularly bring everybody together in the same room, and that is why the LHC network is so unique and is so fabulously effective. I mean, to the point where scientists regularly tell me, when something is broken, the first assumption it's the endpoint, stupid, right? Because the network just works for them. But it does that because everybody has come together and worked together as one, right? And I think the PRP approach is to try to replicate that. So we need to find a way where we can let campus people know that they can talk to us, know what we can do, know what kind of tools we have to come to offer to them, because otherwise they will just tell their local scientists, oh, this can't be done. So the outreach isn't very much for me to pilot scientists that can be evangelists for the things we can do, and then to use that to bring it on the agenda of the individual campuses so they want to support the approaches and work with us so we can have this triangle of campus, R&E network, and scientists, because otherwise we're not going to get this to scale.
Other comments? Okay. Thank you for the question. Other questions? Comments? So being from the quilt, I'm going to ask a question to Marla and her perspective on the regional network. So, you mentioned the mesh or even meshes within your region that you work with. And last year when we were here, there was discussion on, what's the right scale for a mesh? What is that N by N that actually makes it meaningful to the folks that are participating and meaningful for the users that are affected within that mesh. So how do you construct your mesh within your region, and what other, meshes do you participate in, either nationally or internationally?
Well, and I think Jen and I have talked about this. I mean, that has a scaling problem as well, right? You can spend all your time trying to get your meshes working, and they have technical issues as well. And I think that that's something we really need to think about, is what is meaningful. So clearly, we're involved in the quilt mesh, which implies that region to region is working. So presumably, scenic to FRGP, we can look at and say we have a clean path and everything's okay. Within the FRGP, we can look from our participants and say, okay, we have a clean path from University of Colorado to Denver to the Front Range Gigapop. The problem with that I see is we're talking about end users, right? So we don't reach down into the actual campus to the researcher, and we have this scaling problem, right? Because they're sitting on a desktop or an analysis platform or their small campus compute system, and often, not always, the problems are in that last inch, right? They're either on the machine itself, there's an I/O issue, it's a tool they're using that's not appropriately configured, or there's something on the campus itself that they're either not connected at a very high speed, or the campus itself has some sort of performance issue. So to scale all the way down to the end user with these meshes, I think you get a nice high-level view with the meshes that if there's something systemically wrong in the national or international or regional levels, you can see those. But I do think that we have we still have this end-to-end problem, right? And that's a harder problem to fix. You want to add anything?
Any other thoughts on meshes from the other panelists?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to just use one of the cliches. You cannot manage what you can't measure or what you don't measure. So the meshes are a great way to be indicators of issues, and it is important. And I think meshes are also give satisfaction when it is all green. So it's that perspective as well. And because the meshes are supported by active measurements that happen on an ongoing basis, you have some assurance that there is some historical tracking of how things are going. One of the hardest problem is someone said, well, I tried to do a data transfer last night. It didn't work. By the time the ticket gets to an engineer and they try to look at it, everything seems to work. What happened? And that problem then is like, we don't know what happened. It's working now. Be happy. And that goes away. And the next, a month later, the scientist tries again. And that night, and something else goes wrong or doesn't work. And then they conclude that the network is unreliable and unpredictable. And so I need to find other ways for a more predictable, dependable way to do things, and they change behavior. And that's what we are fighting against, is changing of behavior. So if you want the behavior to be to use the network as the first choice, and if there are meshes to say, and meshes can indicate, hey, there was a blip last night, was a packet loss, we have figured it out, or there is an ongoing performance issue that is a soft failure that we can go fix, then that really will help assure the people that there are folks that understand what's going on. And if we find some issue, there are people that can fix it. And that makes them more and more trustworthy of the network itself.
But Inder, I also think that it's somehow we have to find a way to have the meshes integrate in a hierarchical manner, because there are these global resources, exchange points like PackWave, like Manland, like Netherlight, or exchange in Singapore. And somehow we have to have meshes that just show us the performance between those and show that we have the 100 gigs we need between those and that we can use to observe that things work on a global scale. But we can't build, with tens of thousands of people who measure against PackWave, because that won't scale, right? So, but on the other hand, if it becomes this huge, unwieldy thing with lots and lots of different meshes that you have to, have a degree in meshes to just figure out which mesh to look at, then the scientists would just say, well, this I can't figure out what's going on. So we have to find a way to navigate that and build those. And I think we're doing actually a really bad job at building the global scale meshes and getting that data out there, right? I know Jen is working on that, but yeah.
Right, so I agree with that point entirely. One of the things I wanted to point out is the NSF-funded international links. We've done exactly this with this hierarchical approach. We've tested from the East Coast to Europe and South America. We test from the West Coast to several points across the Pacific and into Asia. We make the assumption that across the US is either working, or I can find out about that from another mesh, because we realized we could not scale beyond that. However, the complementary side of that is all of those test points are open for testing if you run into a problem. So if I have a problem with a longer scale transfer, so Transpac, for example, does 15% of the traffic is passed through. It goes from Asia through the US onto either Europe or Africa. So you need to be able to test that. You can do that with these open test points. And the coordination of knowing about, there's international meshes, there are regional meshes, there are campus level meshes if you need them. So I think these, because if you can't measure it, you can't fix it.
Yeah, Lars, I'm sorry, we could go back and forth, but I just want to say that the one leading example is the LHC community, the Atlas. Sean McKee's here, I don't know where he is still. I mean, they do meshes just for their science collaboration. So if you think of hierarchy, I would rather have the scientists have their meshes of sites of interest to them, which are cross networks. Campuses have meshes based on them. Regionals have meshes on what they manage and control. National networks have, their infrastructure. And then you can quickly say, okay, hey, Sean says, I have a problem between these two sites and it's going through 3 networks. Let's look at each of the network's meshes and try to debug that. Now, I know that this is not automated. It requires some knowledge and it's not obvious. There is no Google search to go look for a mesh, and maybe that is an opportunity to figure this out.
There's also probably an opportunity to be less reactive, and there's a lot of information in these meshes. If it's 2 DTNs communicating through a particular path, they're doing grid FTP. if you start to see a relatively low bit rate connection over a fairly large amount of data transferred for a period of time, we could probably infer something's wrong, and being able to know before the end users know that there's an issue is on us as the collective providers of infrastructure.
I acknowledge that. We're not there yet.
Yeah, we're not there, but opportunity.
Well, and Howard, I was just going to add that that's been, I drive my staff crazy because these meshes are also great, but they're not instrumented to notify you that there's a problem, right? So the smarter we could make the meshes to alert someone, whether it's the NOC or somebody else, that says we have a problem, between point A and point B that should be performing better, so that somebody actually goes and looks at it. Because these meshes, as I understand them today, you have to go look at them, right? And unless somebody's sitting there looking at them all the time and analyzing whether they're working or not. So I think that's a goal we should have, is to have them be a bit smarter.
And I'm going to poke Eric Boyd and make sure that Eric Boyd is listening to that as they think about stuff to do in the person or project.
So I'm going to stay on this theme a little bit in terms of what we can be working on to improve on this. And one of the themes over the last day and a half that we've heard is resources, right? What is the missing ingredient for this? And it's, if I could have more resources to do this. So I'd like to ask the panel, if you could have a wish list of what you'd improve if you could have resources for this, what would be at the top of your list? It could be tools, training, more time together in spaces and places like this for sharing.
Well, Jen just said time, which I agree. And I think that's time for all of our staff. I think everybody's kind of running. But I think this instrumentation is something that I would wish for. We're getting more and more complex networks, more and more complex systems. One of the things that came out at NCAR is the codes are getting so complex, and that we're not even sure the codes are working right? And they've gotten to the point where humans can't really actually detect that everything's running correctly. And so I think we're getting close to that with the network, right? That there's so many combinations, and I think, Inder, you just said do it at the research level, but to be honest now, climate research is so complex, and it's not like everybody's just going to PCMDI to get data, right? They're talking and collaborating internationally. And so, one of the things Jen and I talked about, and Kate and I have talked about, is how do we let the user be a little more informed about what is going on? And, we get these pop-ups on our window that, we have a security breach or something's going on. And could we have some sort of instrument for our scientists who say, hey, you're not getting the performance you should be getting. We think you could be moving data 2 to 3 times. You should call the NOC or call your local support team to start working on this problem, because the scale is so large, and I think the engagement people do is fabulous. But we've got hundreds of scientists just at NCAR, and for me to be able to communicate with all of those and work with all of them on any individual networking problem. So how do we make them a little bit smarter? And a lot of us have talked about, Google's changed our life, right? You can quick do a search for something. Could we make that easier for users to, I'm having a network problem, who do I call? Or, those kind of things where you educate your users to at least know a simple thing to go get help. Even at NCAR, our researchers don't necessarily know who to call, and we're a relatively small organization, and so we're not doing as good a job. So I think the more intelligent we can make the systems to help the end user. So I guess that would be the one thing I'd wish for is make them a little bit more capable to know who to talk to.
I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole in this one, but you're reminding me of back when I had time to do research on my own. One of my hobbies was to look at how we actually do measurement. And there is an analogy here. We are learning in this day and age of GDPR that the only way to do really trustworthy systems is to do privacy by design. You can't do that as an afterthought to any system. And actually, as when we build software, we ought to build every system with measurement by design, so that every system is self-measuring, that it's self-monitoring, because even with advanced systems like Persona, we are measuring everything from the outside. So if I really had the resources, what I would go and spend them on was to change every system we have so that the measurement is built in and they're monitoring from inside rather than being monitored from the outside. And I think it's something I would hope that we would someday learn to do. Every system we build, every data transfer engine, every data repository, every storage system we build them so that they measure and have ways to do, the northbound or east-west interface to exchange that measurement information so that we can display that, because that's the only way we will really learn what's going on.
Maybe a therapist. No. Maybe I'm not kidding. No, clearly this is all heading up to, there's going to be a whole bunch of data about the infrastructure itself, and having both the skill set and the resources to turn that data into information and actionable information is a challenge. And if I had additional resources, that would be one area I would focus on, is that skill set and building those shareable tools that could be used broadly across all our stuff.
I agree with everyone they're saying, so I'll try not to repeat it. But I just want to say is that when it comes to analytics and alerting, what I feel that we don't do a good job as a community is to engage the network researchers who actually are building algorithms, or the next generation of network researchers. When I look at papers in ACM or some others, they're interesting. They're doing a new way to do fail tolerance, or they created a linear regression model for something. It just feels like there is no path for us to use that research. So if we as a community have problems like analytics problems, how do we filter this enormous amounts of measurement data into actionable insights? How do we reduce the false positives? These are problems we should have a set of researchers working on, where we don't. And I think there is a communication gap here, because they want problems to be framed in a certain way, and we probably pose it as operational problems that are not interesting to them. So if there is a way to improve communication and engagement between the people that operate networks to people that do research on networks, that would be really helpful.
Excellent. Thank you for the comments. And any last questions?
Jen, I've got a question just to follow up. At University of Virginia, we've rolled out the Science DMZ and the data transfer node, and we've got portable data transfer nodes. And I started asking the question, well, why don't we just put perf sonar on every one of the little portable things, so that every place we've got, we can do testing? And I was told, well, you test, with pings, but you also test with file transfers to see data throughput. And it appears to me that as we scale that out, we get more and more test data going, which could have an interference effect with the actual transfer of data. I know the phone company used to say half of their money was spent on billing. Half of the resources the phone company was spent on billing. That's probably in the days of long distance billing and stuff like that. I don't know. But this whole notion of measurement, measuring in these meshes, especially the top of the hierarchy, is one thing. But as you get down further, how do we even think about measuring one scientist to one scientist? Can we actually instrument that whole thing? I don't know the answer to that.
So there are different pieces of that in different places. We actually have the information for end-to-end file transfers on some systems that got built into Grid FTP with a requirement back, Steve, what was it, 15 years ago, where Kevin said we had to collect user stats for all the systems. It's private data, it's only accessible in certain ways, but that data, some of it at least, is there. It could be de-identified and used in a broader system if we had some of the analytic pieces. I think the theme with that I'm also hearing is trying to give more tools to the end users. That's really what's needed. Personally, I was embedded with Atlas, which is one of the high-energy physics communities, for many years when I was a Globus guy. I hate seeing high-energy physics held up as, here's the community to look at, because they have been doing this for so long. They built their own networks in the early days. They've built all of this. If you talk to other user communities, like the geoscientists, like the chemists, like the bioinformatics, they don't have a Harvey who's going to tell them what's wrong with their network. They don't have even the language to explain what's going on. So I think a piece of that is trying to get them access to data in different ways through infrastructure, like the file transfer tools, like the portals that they're using, that tie these sources together. I think that in part might be able to address some of your questions. We're not there yet, but there's a lot of potential. Yep.
I wanted to go back to something Lars was saying, and I think is echoed in a couple of the comments. In terms of getting more data and embedding it into the systems, there's a lot of work going on right now, for instance, to embed perf sonar natively into the switches. I know that we have loaners from 3 different vendors at the moment that we're working on getting it. I know other folks are trying to do that as well. And there's also a lot of work to embed perf sonar into the tools. I know grid FTP work has been going on for a long time, but there's still work going on today to get stuff out of that. So my point is that I think some of the things that we're talking about are starting to happen, but there's clearly more opportunities for it. Just putting it in the network devices isn't enough. I think embedding it into the disk-to-disk transfers is a really key piece of how you'd want to do it going forward. And if anybody wants to share and work together on that, I think the perf sonar project would be really happy to do that.
And I was just going to add, I think, to follow on what you just said, Eric, that's kind of ties back to what I was saying before, is all of this R&D work that we're doing, we want to be able to continue to focus on that. We don't want the software programmer to have to learn a whole entire different skill set. So that's why, as a part of these processes, and this is going to take time, we have to build people in who are going to be the glue between the programmers, between the engineers, whatever they happen to be. If they're working on these new technologies or building in the analytics to these software systems, we have to embed people into that process and part of the cost if we want to actually start connecting these things and referring back to the network diagram, meaning people network diagram that James Deaton presented yesterday.
Quick comment, actually, going back to Ron, and I agree with you, Eric, so I'm sorry, I just want to respond back to Ron as well. Your network links are never 100%. So, and usually people think of upgrading the network links, at least network engineers that I know, when it is around 50%. So even if 50% of it is used being test traffic, it's okay. I'm just kidding. What I mean to say is it can be managed. How often you test, how much you test at what rate you test at can be indicative of a problem. You don't have to test at the line speed of the interface in order to make that determination. You can do a 1 gig test on a 10 gig link to get an indicator of congestion problems or anything that is wrong. So that's what I meant to say. So I understand those issues, but I think part of that should be a start of a conversation on how to manage the test traffic, not be a distractor of doing testing.
All right, please join me in giving our panelists a hand for sharing their insights.